We are terrified of big tech. We worry that Google knows too much about us, that Amazon is destroying small businesses, or that Elon Musk has too much influence. But if you look at history, our modern corporations are harmless kittens compared to the monster that invented the game. Imagine a company that didn't just have delivery trucks. It had a private army of 260,000 soldiers, twice the size of the actual British military. Imagine a board of directors that didn't just lobby politicians. They conquered entire nations, minted their own currency, and collected taxes from millions of people. This isn't a sci-fi dystopia. This was real. It was called the British East India Company. It was the first megacorps, and it taught the world a dangerous lesson. If you let a company get big enough, it stops being a business and starts being a government. To understand how a grocery store became a nuclear superpower, you have to understand the financial innovation that birthed it. The year is 1600. Queen Elizabeth Rars signs a royal charter granting a monopoly on trade with the East Indies. But the real revolution wasn't the trade route. It was the structure of the company itself. Before this moment, business was personal. If you were a merchant and you wanted to send a ship to India, you fronted the cash. If the ship sank or was taken by pirates, you were ruined. You lost your house, your savings, everything. The risk was too high for almost anyone to take. The East India Company, EIC, popularized the joint stock model. This allowed thousands of investors to pool their money together to fund the voyages. Crucially, it introduced the concept of limited liability. This is the magic spell of modern capitalism. It meant that if the company went bust, you only lost the money you invested. The creditors couldn't come after your house or your personal assets. This shattered the barrier to entry. Suddenly, aristocrats, shopkeepers, and widows were pouring money into the EIC. It unleashed a tsunami of capital that no single merchant could ever compete with. The EIC became a money printing machine, flooding England with spices, silk, and tea. But as the money piled up, their ambition grew. They realized that buying goods was profitable, but owning the source of the goods would be infinite. It started innocently enough. The company built trading posts along the coast of India, places they called factories. They were there to buy cotton, silk, and spices. But in the 17th and 18th centuries, trade was dangerous. Pirates were real, and local wars were common. So the company asked the local Indian rulers for permission to hire a few armed guards to protect their warehouses. That was the Trojan horse. Those few armed guards slowly evolved into a private militia. Then the militia evolved into a standing army. The company realized that it was cheaper to bully local rulers than to negotiate with them. Why pay taxes to a prince when you can just replace the prince with someone on your payroll? By the mid-1700s, the mask came off. The East India Company wasn't exporting goods anymore. They were exporting violence. They began recruiting local Indian soldiers, known as sepoys, trained them in European warfare, and armed them with British muskets. At its peak, the company's private army numbered over 260,000 men. To put that in perspective, that was larger than the actual British army, and larger than the armies of most European nations. Imagine if Apple or Google didn't just have security guards, but had an army of tanks, fighter jets, and aircraft carriers, and they used them to invade countries that refused to buy iPhones. That is exactly what happened. The board of directors in London, men who had never held a gun or stepped foot in the jungle, were commanding wars halfway across the world purely to drive up the stock price. The turning point was 1757. The company's forces, led by the ruthless Robert Clive, defeated the Nawab of Bengal at the Battle of Plassey. But they didn't win through superior tactics. They won through bribery. They paid off the Nawab's general to betray him mid-battle. It was a hostile takeover, literally. After the victory, the company forced the Mughal emperor to sign a treaty granting them the Diwani, the right to collect taxes in Bengal. This is the moment the world broke. Before this, the East India Company had to bring gold and silver from London to pay for Indian spices. That was normal trade. But once they had the Diwani, they stopped bringing gold. Instead, they taxed the local Indian population and used that tax money to buy the Indian goods, which they then shipped to England and sold for 100% profit. It was an infinite money glitch. They were buying India with India's own money. The results were horrific. Because the company answered only to shareholders, they maximized revenue with zero regard for human life. When the Great Bengal Famine hit in 1770, a normal government would have lowered taxes or distributed food. The company did the opposite. They raised taxes to maintain their profit margins. They hoarded rice to sell at inflated prices. Millions of people starved to death. Estimates range from 1 to 10 million. The streets of Calcutta were piled with bodies. And yet, back in London, the company declared an increased dividend for its shareholders. The stock price held steady. It was the ultimate proof that a corporation is a psychopath. It has no soul, only a balance sheet. You might assume that a company with a license to print money and steal nations would be swimming in cash. But by the 1770s, the East India Company was actually on the verge of bankruptcy. How was that possible? Corruption. While the shareholders in London were getting rich, the employees on the ground in India were getting filthy rich. They were stealing from the company, striking side deals, and looting the local treasuries for themselves. These men returned to England with such obscene wealth that they were given a nickname, the Nabobs. They bought massive estates and bribed their way into Parliament, flashing their diamond-encrusted watches, while the company's actual balance sheet bled red ink. In 1772, a credit crisis hit Europe and the company couldn't pay its bills. They owed the Bank of England a fortune. This was the moment the British government faced a choice. They could let the company fail, which is how capitalism is supposed to work, or they could save it. But the company had a trump card. They were too big to fail. They accounted for half of Britain's trade. Their collapse would take the entire British economy down with them. Plus, dozens of members of Parliament held EIC stock. They weren't going to let their own portfolios crash. So, they passed the Tea Act of 1773. This was a massive government bailout designed to help the company offload its surplus tea. They gave the EIC a tax break to dump their tea on the American colonies, undercutting local American merchants. Does that sound familiar? The government rigged the market to save a dying corporate giant. But this time, it backfired. The American colonists didn't see it as cheap tea. They saw it as a corporate monopoly backed by government tyranny. They boarded the ships in Boston Harbor and threw the crates into the water. That's right. The Boston Tea Party, the spark that ignited the American Revolution, wasn't just a protest against a king. It was a protest against a government bailout of the East India Company. The United States was born out of rage against a megacorp. Every Ponzi scheme eventually runs out of road, and every tyranny eventually faces a spark. For the East India Company, that spark came in 1857. By this time, the company had been strip mining India for a century. They had dismantled the local economy, imposed heavy taxes, and treated their own soldiers, the sepoys, with contempt. The final straw was a rumor that the new rifle cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat, offending both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. It wasn't just a mutiny, it was a civil war. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 exploded across the subcontinent. It was brutal and bloody. The company lost control. They had to call in the actual British Army to save them. This was the moment the British public finally woke up. They saw the company for what it was, a rogue state that had prioritized profit over stability to the point of disaster. The British government stepped in. In 1858, they passed the Government of India Act. They nationalized the company's assets. The British Crown took direct control of India, the beginning of the Raj, and the East India Company was stripped of its power. It was eventually dissolved in 1874. But here's the dark truth. The company didn't really die. It just changed shape. The men who ran the EIC didn't go to jail. They retired to their country estates with their millions. More importantly, the model they created survived. The EIC invented the art of corporate lobbying. They showed future generations that if you spend enough money buying politicians, you can write the laws that govern you. They proved that the line between public service and private profit is imaginary. When you look at the revolving door in Washington, D.C. today, where regulators leave the government to take high-paying jobs at the banks they used to regulate, you are watching a system that was perfected by the East India Company 250 years ago. The East India Company is gone, but its DNA is everywhere. It created the blueprint for the modern world. It was the first entity to prove that a corporation could exist beyond the life of its founder, an immortal artificial person designed with a single instruction: grow. When we look at the world today, we see the children of the East India Company. We see tech giants with GDPs larger than European nations. We see defense contractors that profit from prolonged wars. We see pharmaceutical companies that lobby to keep drug prices high. The EIC taught them that if you become essential enough to the state will protect you. It is the concept of privatized gains, socialized losses. And when the gamble pays off, the shareholders keep the gold. When the gamble fails, like in 1772 or 2008, the taxpayer foots the bill. The EIC also pioneered the corporate culture of distance. The directors in London never saw the famine in Bengal. They only saw the numbers on the ledger. Distance creates apathy. Today, a CEO in Silicon Valley can press a button that deletes the livelihood of a warehouse worker in Ohio or a cobalt miner in the Congo, and he never has to look them in the eye. The mechanism is identical. We like to think that democracy controls capitalism, but the history of the East India Company suggests the opposite. Unchecked capitalism eventually buys democracy. They didn't just trade goods, they traded sovereignty. And once you sell that, you never get it back. The story of the East India Company is a warning from the past. It shows us what happens when we confuse profit with progress. If this episode opened your eyes to the real origins of corporate power, you are in the right place. Here at Economic History, we are peeling back the layers of the financial system to show you the machinery underneath. In the next episode, we are going to Italy to meet the Medici family. We will uncover how they defied the church, invented the modern banking system, and turned a mortal sin into the global economy. You do not want to miss episode 7. Subscribe and turn on the bell. I want to know your thoughts. Which modern company do you think is the closest to the East India Company today? Is it Amazon, BlackRock, or something else? Tell me in the comments.